Next up is House File 238, Representative Pinto, the Children and Families Finance Bill. As Representative Pinto makes his way up, Representative Pinto moves that House File 238 be placed on the general register.
That is my motion, Madam Chair.
Thank you, Representative Pinto. And you have an A6 author's amendment. Would you like to move that right away?
Yes, I would like to do that, Madam Chair. I'm happy to provide a description.
In front of us, and could you, just describe a little bit about the A6, please?
Yeah, and I should probably just note for members that the bill before us consists of the Children and Families Budget Bill. Our committee had 2 budget targets, and 238, as it's coming into Ways and Means, contains the language for both those targets, both the education and HHS sides. What's happening now is that they're being split into the HHS, Human Services side, and the education side. So what the amendment does, one notable thing is that it removes the article relating to MDE. That will be placed in House File 2292 when that comes up next. And then on the Human Services side, the A6 amendment moves several programs from being ongoing to being one-time, makes a child care staffing regulation temporary, adds a clarification on employment issues with respect to the new Department of Children, Youth, and Families, makes some updates in fiscal areas, clarifies some data privacy language in that new agency, for which I thank Representative Scott and ongoing conversations there, corrects a number of errors, and that's what the A6 does.
Thank you, Representative Pinto. Discussion to the A6 amendment. Representative Kresha.
Thank you, Madam Chair, and thank you, Representative. So, and I was just looking, which line specifically deletes Article 9? I know you're doing, this was part of the discussion we had the other day on the floor. I just want to make sure I'm getting it right as well.
Representative Pinto.
Thank you, and I know that I should be able to find that very easily. Oh, here it goes. Line 6.4, Representative Kresha.
6.4.
Representative Kresha.
1 second. Very good. Thank you, Madam Chair, and thank you, Representative Pinto.
Any further discussion to the A6 amendment? Seeing none, all those in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
All those opposed, please say no. The motion prevails and the A6 amendment is adopted. There's one more amendment, which is the A7 grant review amendment we've seen a few times already. So with that, Representative Pinto moves the A7 amendment. Any discussion to the A7 amendment? Seeing none, all those in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Aye. All those opposed, please say no. The motion prevails and the A7 amendment is adopted. So to-year bill as amended, Representative Pinto.
Thank you, Chair Olson. Thanks, members of the committee. And Chair, I commend you for how you've grouped these bills together, because the theme today really is about getting every child in our state off to a great start. That means learning and development from birth, high quality early care and learning, on up through K-12. We're going to be addressing Chair Joachim's bill shortly. It means providing a stable and affordable place to live, or ensuring that children have that. That's so critical for child development. That means permanent housing and the housing budget bill. We just heard the great presentation by Chair Howard on that. And then stability and support for those who are between permanent housing, those experiencing homelessness, which is absolutely critical, again, for brain development, for healthy start. It means food. It means safety. It means economic supports for families, including getting back to the high-quality child care and early learning, so that parents can work in order to pay the rent and pay the bills, and to address the workforce shortages that we're well aware of in our state. So all that is about getting kids off to a great start. As I said, our bill that came in comprised of 2 separate budget targets, and is now consisting of 2 separate bills. And although we're considering the bills separately, I really would urge you to view them as a strategic whole, that working together to ensure healthy development for all kids in the state. And in fact, in future budget sessions, I'm hopeful that we can consider these proposals together as part of a unified Department of Children, Youth, and Families, which is contained in HF238. But together, the 2 bills represent a historic investment in getting kids off to that great start, and there is no better investment for us, and there is no bigger payoff that we can have. So 238 is the Human Services side of our budget, and the Human Services side of child care and early learning. So 2292 will be the education side. It's also the other areas that I addressed: stability and support families experiencing homelessness, economic supports, food security, safety for children. So I'm going to walk through the different pieces of that, and actually briefly, I think jumping off of the housing bill we just heard, I'm going to start with the issue of stability and support for families experiencing homelessness, because that really does tie in so well. And what this really consists of in our bill is a proposal that this committee's heard, that we all passed off the House floor, the Pathway Home Act, for which I thank Vice Chair Keeler of my committee and Chair Gomez for her work. We include essentially the entire Pathway Home Act that passed through the House. In addition, funding for Safe Harbor, including regional navigator services, and making sure that we are addressing homelessness in that historic way. I won't get into more detail because we had a lot of discussion on the floor, but just to recognize what a historic effort we are making in this critical area. We are addressing food security, including food shelf funding, operations, and capital for that important area. Funding for food security among tribal nations and American Indian communities. SNAP outreach, so that we're making sure that families are taking advantage of the food benefits that they have at the federal level and taking advantage of a federal match in that area. Even diaper distribution from Representative Hicks, a proposal from her, which is just about as critical as food when you've got a young baby, when you have a baby. Safety for children, we are fully funding the implementation of the Families First Prevention Services Act, including strong kinship supports, as well as informal kinship supports. We know how important it is for children to be with their kin, to be with family. We're funding a major series of child welfare initiatives involving tribal nations and American Indian communities. We have a new child protection track to address sex trafficking by a non-caregiver. At the moment, right now, if there's sex trafficking by a non-caregiver, there has to actually be an interview with the sex trafficker under our current rules because of how child protection statutes work and a lot of ways in which it is really not victim-centered and not trauma-informed. We want to fix that. And then a series of initiatives to provide support after foster care. We also have an area of focus on economic supports, including 6-month reporting for the Minnesota Family Investment Program, so families don't have to keep on coming in every month. Reform to sanctions and eliminating the diversionary work program, which has been found to really be unnecessary. All these are under the leadership of Chair Noor, for which I'm grateful. We have a cost of living adjustment for the MFIP housing benefit. We're expanding MFIP eligibility for immigrants experiencing sexual and domestic violence. We're expanding the Family Assets for Independence in Minnesota, or FAME program, which helps families to gain more independence through having their own assets and expanding. We're expanding community action programs, expanding funding for that, and establishing community resource centers. This is an initiative from our counties that they've been calling out for as a place for families who are in low income to be having services and support in one place and getting the support that they need. And then I do want to talk about childcare and early learning, and we've had a couple references to it. We are increasing CCAP rates. Members will remember House File 13, which increased rates to the 75th percentile. That is included in our bill. And we're providing childcare to more families. We're increasing funding. We're reprioritizing the waiting list for counties to get more care to families. And we're expanding to foster parents, to relatives, to caregivers experiencing a mental health crisis. We are providing support for family, friend, and neighbor care, an initiative from Chair Howard, providing quite a bit more support for child care providers, one-stop assistance, shared services alliance, IT grants, continuous licensing for our hardworking family child care providers, centralized registration for CCAP. And critically, we are providing support for the people who are doing this work. Teachers, early childhood educators have the lowest wages of anyone receiving a high school diploma. Anybody. So no more important work that we do and no lower pay. These are disproportionately women and women of color. And so we have the Great Start Compensation Support Program to continue the monthly payments that providers have been receiving, to say that this is something that is a public good and it deserves and needs public support. About a third of these folks are on public assistance themselves, and having them be lifted out of poverty will not only improve outcomes for our children, but also will improve outcomes for them as well. And then finally, we have strengthening and reforming the system, a series of proposals. We're partnering with our sovereign tribal nations in a number of areas, as you've heard. We're finally investing in necessary administration in this area, including significant IT investments. We have a lot regarding program integrity, including the language from House File 13. And we are looking to combine the very multitudinous child care and early learning programs out there into unified Great Start scholarships. over a number of years, and that's connected to the new agency that I referenced, the Department of Children, Youth, and Families. There is a lot here, and I'm sure we'll have a lot to discuss. I really want to note the way in which, though, combining the prior bill we heard and the bill we're about to hear, how this is all a unified system to say that when we get kids off to a great start, we all benefit, and I look forward to the discussion. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Representative Pinto. Discussion to House File 238. Representative Scott.
Thank you, Madam Chair, and Representative Pinto, thank you for your work on, your bill, and also thank you for working with me on the data provisions. In standing up this new agency, as we've discussed, there's a lot of information about kids, families, parents, that's going to be going back and forth, and so we want to make sure that it's as secure as possible. So I look forward to continuing our work on that. I wanted to address a little bit, now that we've adopted the A7 and we've been adopting these amendments for financial review or nonprofit grant recipients required. And I'm just wondering, in light of feeding our future and some of these issues, with this amendment now in place, do you think that there, if this amendment had been in place prior to the Feeding Our Future issue, would this have prevented that? I'm looking through the amendment. I'm not 100% sure that it would have. I'm not sure what the red flags would be, as I'm reading over this amendment. And I know that, this amendment wasn't your language. It's being adopted on almost every bill. But I'm just wondering if you have any thoughts on how that will all would have melded together had this been in place.
Representative Pinto.
Thank you, Chair. Thanks, Representative Scott. And as you're aware, Representative Scott, I work outside the legislature as a prosecutor, and there's going to be bad actors, right, out there, regardless of what we're going to do. And the issue is we want to make sure that we have a series of checks along the way to address that bad behavior as quickly as possible and to address it, right? So I do view this, I don't know specifically about this language as applied to that situation. I mean, for one thing, it's a different agency, right? This language is going on for Human Services. That was with the Department of Education. But in terms of, but of course, this will be going on in future bills as well. The first step, right, is to have an evaluation as there is a grant applicant, which is what this does. I will remind you that in the Feeding Our Future case, it was in fact the agency, Department of Education, that identified red flags and that contacted the federal government because it was a federal program and said, hey, we have these concerns. And as I understand it, was essentially told, hey, we want to investigate. They sort of hand it off, and you want to make sure that you don't disrupt or cause a problem in a criminal investigation. And so, in fact, it was the agency that identified this as being an issue. What I'll note is that our bill, and you'll recall that this is the case in House File 13 as well, what our bill does regarding Human Services is to say that when another agency identifies a concern, like MDE identifying it for Feeding Our Future, if MDE cuts off the grantee, that DHS can do the same, because under current law, and right at the moment, because House File 13 has not become law, DHS lacks that ability to be able to, in fact, cut off a recipient of grant funding, someone who's partnered with the agency, if they've been cut off by another agency. They have to go through their own processes. So House File 238 at this point, and I'll be able to find the reference momentarily, gives the agency the power to do that. So I say between the A7 language at the front end and then this ability to cut off fraudsters who've committing fraud in one area, and then cutting them off in other areas, it goes great strides, I would say, to addressing these concerns.
Representative Scott.
Thank you, Madam Chair, and thanks for that explanation, Representative Pinto. I mean, what we're talking about here too, I guess it was actually a previous bill was CCAP, and then but you do have the daycare, right? You do have the daycare provisions in your bill, and we know that there's been fraud with that too. And I'm just wondering, just in terms of the language of this amendment that's now on the bill, if it would have prevented those things from happening in the past, because it just says if things are of a significant concern, and I don't, I'm not a grant writer, I'm not a grant provider, I don't know what red flags might be considered a significant concern. I just want to make sure that if we're putting this language in, that it has enough teeth in it to catch the bad actors. And especially in light of what we're doing this session seems to be a lot of grants to nonprofits. And with that comes the springing up of all kinds of new nonprofits. And I do see that this amendment does address folks that don't have like a past history to look at and to see if they're in good financial standing from the past. But my concern is, preventing the new folks that are springing up, or just making sure that they're not going to become bad actors. So I'm wondering, with all this, with these amendments that we're adding on each bill concerning grant recipients, are the departments having to hire new people to do these investigations? Because there's an awful lot of paperwork to go through. All these multiple nonprofits that are going to be applying for grants.
I'll go to Representative Pinto, and then I also know, just to speak to the A7 and some of the work that's also being done, not just in this area, but in the state government finance bill as well. So I maybe will have Chair Cleavorn, if you feel comfortable with that too. So do you want to just speak to some of the broader work that's going on to that, Chair Cleavorn, and kind of how it dovetails with the A7 amendment?
Thank you very much. And I'm going to thank Lead Nash for his cooperation and work on this as well. In the state government bill, which passed out yesterday with not unanimous support, it has a significant portion of that bill which has to deal with putting in a system-wide enterprise grants management oversight system so that we can look at the totality of the individuals applying for grants, and we will be able to see patterns that emerge. And currently, right now, with our outdated systems, we don't have the ability for one agency to talk to another agency, so it's very difficult to see who these bad actors might be. And so with a more integrated and updated system, and the importance of this amendment that is going on for this oversight, we would have a better way to catch or to see at the maybe a beginning, because as Chair Pinto said earlier today, there will always be bad actors, but we need to be able to get them early and get them out of the system. And as Chair Pinto mentioned also, and I would like to reiterate, it was the department that caught this and brought it forward. And then the channels and protections that are in place kicked in, and these bad actors were caught. But we want to make sure that they don't have an opportunity to enter the system at any place. So I really encourage people to look at the state government bill and look at the grants administration oversight provisions, and that when those bills come forward, to please wholeheartedly support them. None of us, not one of us on this committee, want to see one state tax dollar go to bad actors. So thank you. And it is a good amendment, and I appreciate every individual putting this on their bill. Thank you.
Representative Pinto.
Thank you, Chair, and thanks, Representative Scott. Just a reminder, too, that the now 5-year-old issues that were identified regarding CCAP in the OLA report at that time from 2018, just a reminder that, or maybe I guess the 2018 was when the report was being conducted and released in 2019. At the time, we made many changes in terms of program integrity, both for CCAP and for a number of other programs as well. They received bipartisan praise. We enacted them in 2019. When House File 13 came through here, I remember passing out a listing of those. So what we're doing in HF238 now is even going beyond that, adding even more, which is a little bit separate maybe from the grant issues. So identifying, addressing this from a number of different angles, just to provide some reassurance.
Representative Scott.
Thank you, Madam Chair. And so I appreciate both Representative Cleavorn and Representative Pinto's explanations, but I didn't hear in there, are we adding new employees to look at all of this financial information of the grantees or these nonprofits?
Representative Pinto.
Thank you, Chair, and thanks, Representative Scott. I completely forgot about that. So if you look on line 518 of the HHS spreadsheet, it's the one with the really small numbers, you'll see it says Financial Fraud and Abuse Investigations Program Integrity Enhancements, which I'll note is actually a little bit different than the grant review issue, so I'll get to that in a second. But just to note that there are FTEs being added for program integrity. This is actually, in this bill, it's not just the areas within Children and Family Services, it's actually all of DHS, just how the bills kind of got, the budgets end up being distributed between Chairs Liebling and Chair Knorr and my committee. But so we do have those. And then regarding the grant recipients, it's actually this is a timely point because this amendment just came out for DHS. We've been having conversations. I know that there may end up needing to be some additional funding to address it, but this is something that still have to have an ongoing conversation to figure that out. But I'll just note that there are these multiple FTEs being added for program integrity already in the budget.
Representative Scott.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Well, thank you for that explanation, Representative Pinto. I appreciate it. And I just want to point out here, because it's been mentioned a couple of times that the Department of Education caught the error, but that was only after they were sued. So let's make sure that the whole issue is being expressed correctly. But thank you for that, for the thorough explanation of how this is going to work. Thank you.
Representative Pinto, would you like to comment on that at all?
I think this lawsuit came after the department cut them off from funding. So they cut them off from funding because they had, had a reason to cut them off. But anyway, a separate conversation.
Representative O'Neill.
Are you done? Okay. Thank you, Madam Chair. I was just checking to make sure my colleague was done. To this point, so businesses are not nonprofits. So I know that the amendment that you adopted was specifically for nonprofits.
Yeah.
And the CCAP money goes to businesses, right? So we're talking about kind of oranges and apples, right?
Yep, agreed.
So I'm wondering, in light of that, and I don't think you actually mentioned like how many FTEs, so that's, you had alluded to the spreadsheet, but it's really, really tiny, and I'm getting older, and so if you could just tell me what the FTEs were. But then, more specifically, if you could let us know in Article 4, under licensing, you have some provisional changes to the CCAP licensing, and if you could just explain that really quickly, it's relevant to this conversation.
The page number?
Oh, page number. Well,
Article 4.
let's see, Article 4.
I don't know. I can't find Article 4.
Article 4 starts on 90. Let's see. And it's the section specifically, Representative Pinto, that talks about allowing for withholding payments due to any credible allegations of fraud. So it's specifically saying that the department can allow the withholding of the payments, and then it can be reinstated if it was found to be unfounded. But I don't know if you know what section that is specific. Okay, you got it. You're there.
All right, Representative Pinto.
Thank you, Chair, and Representative O'Neill. And yeah, and good point. That was kind of the point I was making, that this is a little bit of a separate issue than from the A7 in a way. And so again, just a reminder, in 2019, we made a massive number of changes in terms of program integrity for DHS, not just relating to CCAP, but other programs as well. I feel like I've handed out that one pager like 5 or 6 times now, and I'm now regretting not having my CA that we did it again today. But just a reminder, massive number of changes. On top of those, though, in the language that you're pointing to, starting on page 90, Article 4, is essentially language that passed the House in HF238 a couple months ago now, that allows the department to cut off, if there are programs that have been identified as committing fraud or been cut off by another agency, it will now allow DHS to do that as well. That's in here. And allow for temporary withholding, as you pointed out, middle of page 92, line 92.16, allowing temporary withholding if there's even a credible allegation of fraud. And so this will, in fact, expand the ability beyond what already exists, which, again, is quite ample. I mean, a lot of changes since I feel like I keep on hearing references to there being concerns with the CCAP program. That was 4 years ago. There have been lots of changes, lots and lots and lots that got a lot of support. But in addition, you're right that there's a couple pages here worth pages 90 to 92 that provide even more ability, not just relating to CCAP, but all DHS programs.
Representative O'Neill.
Thank you, Madam Chair. And then a couple quick things. So if you happen to have the FTEs to do this fraud prevention and oversight, if you happen to have those FTEs, you had pointed to in the spreadsheet, and I have like 5 in front of me. So if you could just let us know what the FTEs were. And then the other thing, when you talk about CCAP and, we have kind of a mass exodus, and I'm sure you've talked about this, I'm not on your committee, but a mass exodus of the little small in-home daycare centers closing. And quite a few of them were my friends, and they were explaining how onerous it was. And I'm sure you've talked about this in your committee. Is there anything in here to dial back some of the regulations that literally are driving women business owners out of the market of doing this, because it's just too heavy-handed? They have regulators coming to their door at unannounced hours when they're trying to take care of kids and saying, you have a hot cup of coffee, you can't have that. Just really, to them, outrageous sort of things happening. So I'm wondering, is there anything in here to kind of get at peeling back that onion of driving women business owners straight out of the market and then creating this huge problem that there's not enough spots left for children to be cared for? So I'm wondering if that's addressed.
Representative Pinto.
Thank you, Chair and Representative O'Neill. So first, I forgot about that. Your first question, 6 FTEs is the answer on that line, on that barely readable line 520.
Thank you.
Sure, and got that. And again, that covers all DHS programs. So regarding the concern about family child care's providers exiting, and I will say that just in general, we have just this huge gap in terms of the number of folks providing child care and early learning and the number of slots that are needed and the affordability. Nobody works harder than the people who are doing this work, right? And then certainly that is extremely true for family child care providers. There's a lot in the bill to provide support for them. I mean, starting with this making the economics work a little bit better. I might say making the economics work less bad, because the economics of child care and early learning just are entirely broken, and that's part of the reason that we're losing the folks doing this work. So we're trying to provide at least a little bit of economic support to make the numbers work a little better. And there's shared services alliances, so that if you're trying to sort of run your business, you can partner with a number of other family child care providers and sort of do some of the back office stuff to be able to share the work and a number of things like that. And then, so there's a number of these points to provide support. There is a regulation modernization effort happening right now with the family child care regulation. So there's work done. We funded in 2021. It's a several-year process of having family child care providers and other stakeholders, families and others, review the regulations and say, this is what's working, this is what's not working. So that will be coming out very soon. That's something that sort of was previously funded, so it's not directly addressed here. We want to be careful with regulations, though, right? We want to make sure that regulations that are getting in the way of somebody doing their work and aren't helping kids, we certainly want to get rid of. On the other hand, the things that really change the economics are changing child-teacher ratios. And, I don't know, if you got 4 infants, and that's 4 infants to 1 person, I think going to 5 or 6 infants starts getting pretty dangerous and getting away from high quality, which is what we get when we talk about getting kids off to a great start. So it's a balancing act, but yes, there's quite a bit in here for our hardworking family child care providers and others who do this work.
Representative O'Neill.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Thank you, Representative Pinto. We certainly don't want children to be at risk, and I think that's sort of what you're getting at. And that's at least the characterization that I've heard from friends and family and their friends, quite frankly, that are in the business. It wasn't really so much the things that you're stating. It was just this unannounced at the door. They're trying to take care of kids. Regulators are at the door. They're asking about things that are, in their view, unimportant and not related to safety of children and things like that. So I'm glad that there's something moving in that direction. I think that is one of the bigger reasons of why, at least people that are telling me that one of the bigger reasons why they're leaving. And I'm sure more money helps, but it doesn't help you can't have a hot cup of coffee around a child or something like that. I mean, just some basic simple things. You certainly don't want to be irresponsible. You don't want to have a boiling hot cup of coffee over top of an infant. I mean, there's logical things, right? But anyway, so I'm glad that that's coming out. And I'm glad that you put a little bit more kind of belt and suspenders around fraud, and we'll see if it works. Because, you know, the 1%, I would say there's the 1%er. I worked in nonprofits for many years, and we always call them the 1%. There's always a 1%er, the bad actors that try to upend or take what is not theirs, or, you know. So they're very creative and very motivated. So we'll see if that works. But, you know, that's the best we can do, I suppose, at this point. But we'll see. We'll see what the OLA says when they revisit that, if they do. So thank you, Representative Pinto.
Representative Petersburg.
Thank you, Madam Chair. And, you know, I think earlier you talked about how this particular bill lifts people out of poverty, and I wanted to just kind of remind us that really government spending for living expenses doesn't lift anybody really out of poverty. They still have their own productivity and income there. And so I always push back a little bit to say I think we do a disservice if we don't do something that helps individuals actually grow and become more productive themselves. I will tell you that I have talked to many parents in which their kids would be just as likely to stay at home if there wasn't some advantage or some incentive for them to actually leave home. It's just human nature. And so I always ask this question when it comes around here: is there anything in this bill that helps people get incentivized to actually go out and do some work and improve themselves? Do we have any programs that helps? In housing, I know that we have been told that once people get in emergency housing, it's much more difficult to get them out of that once they get in because of just the bureaucracy and so forth. I'm concerned that we are creating more of that with some of these programs too. So my simple question is, are we doing anything to help people actually improve themselves and move beyond the need for the programs that are here?
Representative Pinto.
Thank you, Chair, and thanks, Representative Petersburg. I might, so yes, there's a lot, and maybe I'll note a couple things first. So I mentioned the Family Assets for Independence in Minnesota program, or FAME program. I think is exactly along the lines of what your sort of your initial point of saying that. As folks are gathering, it encourages people that as they're working and getting more income, it supports that to sort of continue to encourage them to build up a stable bank account and have more assets. I guess I would, though, just push back somewhat on the idea that, you know, like I feel like you were saying towards the end there, well, if somebody is provided emergency shelter, that would somehow make them less likely to move into permanent stable housing. There's a program down the street from my home called Project Home that hosts families in a former convent, actually. And, you know, they have enormous success where families are there for a bit and have a chance to be a family together in the former, rooms where the nuns used to live. And then invariably they receive the support they need to get out and receive more stability. And I'll say that when they do, they actually, the nuns have now moved into the neighboring assisted living facility, and if one of them passes away, they actually have the furniture from the nun who's passed away actually comes along with them. In general, when I think there's maybe a little bit of difference in philosophy that when you give somebody a stable place to stand, when you make sure that they, for example, have the childcare that they need so they can go work and pay the rent, they go work and pay the rent, and then as they work and pay the rent, they do some more work and they get themselves into a better and better, stronger and stronger position. So I think the whole bill is built around that, and there are some specific things that I think you'd like in particular.
Representative Petersburg.
Thank you. And I didn't mean to generalize everything, because I know there are programs that have real benefits, and then there are others because of bureaucracy and other things that tend to trap people more. And so I applaud you for doing that. I just will always ask the question, what are we doing to help people grow and beyond where they're at? Because that's where they get their most self-esteem, growth, et cetera. And I think we do a disservice when we don't help people become better than what they are. And so thank you for that.
Representative Moeller.
Thank you, Madam Chair. And I just wanted to comment too, just briefly on some of the fraud questions that were asked as well. The public safety bill that this committee will be looking at includes a state fraud unit at the Bureau of Criminal Apprehension so that agencies will be required to report suspected fraud, and there'll be consistent investigations by the BCA. This is also came from some of the OLA reports. So just wanted to make sure that that was on the record and that members here could look forward to seeing that later on when we hear that bill. Thank you.
Thank you, Representative Moeller. Representative Joachim.
Thank you. Quick one to just give a shout out to about childcare being so important to break that cycle. I have an organization in St. Louis Park that's called Perspectives, and folks here might know of it because it was in a bonding bill a few years ago to expand their intake center and include, as they bailed out, to include childcare. It's an organization that takes women straight out of homeless shelter, houses them for up to 2 years, provides addiction therapy, job training, and then really takes care of their kids too, to catch them up in nutrition and school. And they're looking to expand because what they're finding is even though they can break that cycle and build that hope and have the mothers move out and be sustaining on their own, they're really having a hard time finding affordable childcare to continue on that path. So all the investments that you're making in here are so very important. I did have one quick question because when I was reading the bill brief last night, what caught my eye, which I found was really interesting, was the electronic checklist for child care providers. Because, so when I was on city council and we'd, have to do health and safety inspections for buildings because codes are important. We don't want buildings to fall down on people. So, but with our rental inspections, we made sure that we provided the checklist ahead of time because we wanted people to be successful. And I know years ago when I was doing some constituency work, it was really hard for a new owner when they were starting a daycare to find a specific, like, give me a list so I know what I have to do. And I was just really excited when I saw this electronic checklist because I think that'll go a long way to helping our daycare, childcare providers, whether it be private, nonprofit, home-based, to know what those requirements are ahead of time so that they can work in partnership and be successful.
Representative Pinto.
Thanks, Chair, and it's too bad Representative O'Neill's no longer in the room because, yeah, that I completely wasn't even thinking about that there is the county licensors are going to be required to use that checklist. I might hold off on further comment until she comes back in my closing, so she gets to hear that.
Representative Kresha.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Excuse me. Thank you, Representative Pinto. So just a couple closing comments. I'm sure we'll have a robust debate on the House floor where we can talk about the policy as well as all of the investments and allocations here. But my hat's off to you, first of all, issues of importance. I know that personally for you, your passion, and I've watched it over the time that you've been here, really coming into these issues. And a lot of what you're working through here are issues that have been inherited by you or inherited to your committees because of things that have happened outside. And I'll just specifically call out one of the notable efforts of the sex trafficking and the separate track. I know as we look at child protection, we look at the different tracks and how we're trying to handle that. And many people may not be familiar with the Family First that actually came through in the previous administration and how that's working its way through the state. So there's a lot of very deep nuances that you are tackling, and they're in there. And so hats off to you for that. And you've always been sincere about that, and I appreciate the conversations. That being said, there's still some concerns, as there always will whenever you put together a very large and aggressive initiative like this. And I think that one of the, as I've been listening to conversations as we come through this session, one of the things that I'll call out is my challenge is we are acquiescing sometimes as a legislature to the executive branch. And we can say whatever we want about how Feeding Our Futures happened, how the CCAMP stuff happened, but it happened. And it happened on the executive side and on the executive watch. And frankly, I think that Minnesotans are very generous and want to help people. But what I've heard is a lack of trust, a lack of confidence on how these issues were happened. Yes, MDE caught some of this, but the length of time in which this was allowed to happen, and frankly, the shrugging of the shoulders by the governor who just, when I look at how he handled the MDE commissioners and cycling through some of that, I just don't think there was a real serious, stare at Minnesotans and say, you know what, this happened on my watch. I'm embarrassed by it. This is horrible, and we should clean that up. And that lack of trust and that lack of confidence is filtering into, I'll take, for example, the new agency that you're creating. I think that we can all agree there are things to be cleaned up and combined in this new agency. However, my concern at this point, and I expressed it a little bit in committee, is I think we're just taking those pieces and we're putting them together, and I have yet to see the real reform. Now, you may have that, and you may have that vision, but I'll be honest, I don't think that the executive branch sees it the same way. I think that they're just going to put these pieces together, and it could be layered and layered and layered, and we suddenly have this larger these larger layers without the real, an analogy I've used to use, without the analogy of put your badge on the table. Hey, you either fix this or you turn your badge in as a sheriff and you leave town. I don't see that here. I don't see that with this. And not that you're not putting those forward in your bill. I don't see that on the executive side. I frankly don't have enough confidence that the executive branch is going to really address these issues seriously or show that they're going to. I could be wrong. We're the legislative branch, and I don't have to agree with the executive branch, but I can call that out. And I don't care which side of the party you're on or which side of the fence you're on. It is our job to look at this and call the executive branch out and say, here's our expectations of what we hand to you and expect those to be done. So those are issues that I see as we go forward with this. There'll be lots of other things to talk about, but again, to you personally, Chair Pinto, and to your committee, I know you run it very well. I've heard great things, and I've watched your committee and listened, and you're always very respectful of the conversation and what happens. But I think the issues on here and how those are going to be put into statute and handed over to the executive branch still have too many concerns for me to vote for this bill.
Further discussion, Representative Hornstein.
Thanks, Madam Chair. I know a comment was made just a few minutes ago that these public programs, tend not to work. And first of all, thank you, Representative Pinto. This is a great bill. I'm very proud to support it, and I do appreciate that you have public support. But when we look at the landmark public program at the federal level, the War on Poverty, poverty rates dropped 30% in the ensuing years after LBJ and Congress enacted that bill in 1964. So we know these programs work if they're properly funded, and I know this will work because it's properly funded. Thank you, Chair Pinto.
Thank you. I don't have any other members on the list, and I assume Representative Kresha, your comments as the lead on this were sort of the close there now that lead Garofalo's out. But and I'll be mindful of that as we move into the other bills too, Representative Kresha. So,
Thank you, Madam Chair.
And with that, then I don't see any further discussion. I'll turn it to Representative Pinto to final word on your bill.
Thank you, Chair, and members. Just a quick indulgence that now that Representative O'Neill's back in the room, just pointing out to her that the provision in the bill to require county licensors of family child cares to use an electronic licensing inspection checklist, which I hadn't even thought about, and just to remind you that the family child care is regulated administered at the county level, which makes it a lot more complicated. But happy to continue to talk with you about that. And members, I do think I really appreciate Chair Hornstein's closing comments referencing child poverty, because as you all know, I focused very heavily on child care and early learning, but ultimately this bill, especially HF238, really is about that, about addressing poverty and ensuring that kids have that great start. We know the impact that being in poverty has on a single child, and addressing that for a number of children will have massive payoffs for all of us. So I greatly appreciate your support, and I've appreciated the conversation. Thanks, Chair.
Thank you, Representative Pinto, and thanks for all of your work on this. In the next bill we'll hear as well. So with that, Representative Pinto renews his motion that House File 238 as amended be placed on the general register. All those in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
All those opposed, please say no. No. The motion prevails, and House File 238 as amended has been placed on the general register.